Hi, everybody. Thanks for coming out. Thanks to PPK also for putting this together. First time in Amsterdam, and this is an amazing venue, too, so it's really fun to be here. My name is Kevin Whinnery. I work for a company called Accelerator, which is based out of California, although I'm from the great state of Minnesota, back in the States. I've been with Accelerator since before we had Titanium, so it's been kind of cool to see it grow and become what it has become today. But through all of that, I've always been a JavaScript developer. I've always been working on the front end, on single-page applications and rich front ends. So it's been really fun for me to be a part of this technology and get it to where it has been. But what we're here to talk about, at least very briefly, because I figure most of the people in the audience today are very well familiar with sort of the friction that exists between the web as a platform and native operating systems as a platform. But I want to talk a little bit about this debate so we can start to essentially put it behind us, because it's a debate that doesn't have to exist. I think a lot of smart and pragmatic software developers have already done this, but I want to get to a place where we can move past this debate and start focusing back in on users, where our focus as developers belongs. So on the one side of the debate, we have web applications. And I don't think I have to sell this audience on why web applications are awesome, right? They're based on open standards. There are no gatekeepers that are separating you as the developer from the users that are actually enjoying your software. It's really easy to deploy and manage web applications. Again, because there's no code signing process. There's no approval process that you have to navigate. And that's one of the aspects that's made the web a really powerful platform. It's also extremely portable. Whatever the cool new tablet is that comes out tomorrow, chances are extremely good that it's going to have a web browser. So having your application deployable on the web is going to guarantee you the most bang for your buck and the most value for your time as a developer. And the web as a platform is probably most powerful because of elements outside of HTML and CSS and JavaScript and the technologies that we use to create these applications. Those technologies and the tools we use to create them are actually the weakest part about the web as a platform. The strongest part about the web as a platform is the fact that it's completely open, it's linked together, it's searchable and accessible. You can reach pretty much any user in the world using the web as a platform, and that's what makes it powerful, much more so than the sometimes flawed technologies that we use to actually target those users. So in the other corner, we have native applications. And native applications have become popular because they have APIs and features that aren't typically accessible to web applications. They have platform-specific APIs or sensors that simply have not existed as a web standard in the past. They have responsive user interfaces, especially on mobile devices where we're still dealing with relatively underpowered devices. We don't have a desktop machine with a quad-core CPU. They are getting more powerful, and the hardware is getting better all the time, so it's becoming less of an issue. But native applications typically have a more responsive user interface than web applications on mobile. But all of that aside, I think those are actually things that are going to continue to erode in importance over time, with device API standards being pushed by a variety of organizations and adopted by Mozilla in Boot2Gecko. I think they're actually, the feature gap, can web applications do X, Y, or Z? That's going to continue to get better over time, and it's going to eventually become significantly less of a problem. The responsiveness of the user interface, similarly with the hardware acceleration and the new features that are coming out in CSS3 and modern web browsers, again, the responsiveness of the UI is going to become an increasingly insignificant concern for web applications too. But where web applications really sort of pale in comparison to native applications isn't really anything about the rendering technology or anything else. It's about the tightness of the integration with the overall experience of using the platform. So on my iPhone, I know my applications are going to be able to send me notifications in the notification center. I can pull down on the status bar and see what my application has to tell me there. I know I'm probably going to be able to find configuration options in the settings menu. If I'm on Android, I know that my application is going to be able to run background tasks and, again, give me notifications in my status bar and allow me to share data with other applications installed on my phone. So it's that sort of convergence of features that native applications on a platform have together, which makes native applications most compelling. So in terms of the debate really comes from people on both sides of the spectrum that say you should only, the web is the only platform that matters. And on the other side of the spectrum, the people that say native applications are so much better, the web is just a toy, the web is dead, blah, blah, blah. Basically, what they're telling each other is if you're going to build for the web, you're going to be sacrificing user experience for the convenience of web development or for your own, for the sake of using the tool that you like to use best. If you build for native platforms, a web developer is likely to spit back in your face. If you're a native developer, you're locked into a proprietary system. You're at the mercy of Apple or whoever the native platform vendor is. And at that point, you're essentially creating a piece of, you're creating a CD-ROM, something that's disposable software that's just going to be thrown away when the next version of that software comes out. So the reason that this debate sort of rages on is because ultimately both sides are right. The native application developers are right in that they have a significant advantage by being able to be first-class citizens on a platform, and quite frankly, their user interfaces are going to be more responsive and perform better on today's mobile devices. And on the side of the web, they're right. Their platform is amazing too. The freedom of the web as a platform is and has been a revolutionary force in the world. So there's truth on both sides of this debate, which is why I think tempers start to flare. But really, at the end of the day, we're talking about zealotry of people that really like one platform or another. The browser, or the web, which sort of encompasses the browser and globally connected networks, all of that taken together is one platform that you can develop for, and it's a really awesome platform. This platform is also embedded within other native platforms, but it's a distinct platform in and of itself with its own characteristics and strengths and weaknesses. And we have a lot of emotion around this because when we invest in a platform and we start to learn it, we want that platform to remain relevant or even be dominant. And that's what sort of leads to fraying tempers. And it sort of leads to the question, too, well, if these platforms are in conflict, is one platform ever going to win and sort of become the one platform that rules them all? If one platform is going to win, my money is on the web. It's going in an interesting direction, especially with Boot2Gecko, which is going to start patching those important holes in the web as a platform, which is the sort of integration of one application with another in a sort of overall unified ecosystem. But I'm not really holding my breath. I think I tend to agree with Horace, who spoke in the first talk of this morning, that there's an excellent chance that we'll end up with 5 dominant mobile platforms. I think Android's not going anywhere. iOS isn't going anywhere. The web, for sure, is not going anywhere. And I think we'll start to see other interesting competitors arise as well. But all of that is, to us as developers, not much of a concern. We as developers have to be concerned about our user and their needs and not what our personal preferences are. So and pragmatic software developers have always felt that way. Use the right tool for the job, and that rule remains true today. But on mobile, we have sort of a unique problem. We have users that sort of expect to have a great experience from our business or from our brand on multiple devices throughout their day and for different purposes throughout their day. Our user might be on their phone at the breakfast table in the morning, on their desktop computer during the day, maybe on their couch with a tablet at night. So we have lots of people using multiple devices for different purposes at different points during their day. So as developers, we can't really afford to choose sides. They're going to be on multiple platforms. They're going to be on multiple form factors. And we have to figure out a way to maximize our coverage on all of these platforms and devices and form factors. And we have to embrace their strengths and weaknesses. We have to sort of understand that one platform is not going to be the best job for every single use case, and we're going to need to go outside of our comfort zones as developers from time to time. So basically, I'd like to kind of try to get us past this web versus native debate. I don't think that's the right conversation to be having. What we should be having is a conversation about how we can do web and native. The web is an amazing platform, and there are also compelling native platforms out there that we should be thinking about too. And once we realize that we have legitimate use cases for both, ultimately our users win. So there doesn't need to be this zero-sum game of native versus web. So that could be the end of my presentation, and we could just say, great, that's awesome. We should just develop for every platform all the time and make our users extremely happy. And in theory, that works really well. We could, create handcrafted experiences for every refrigerator that runs Android 2.1, and that would be awesome. But in practice, developing N applications for N different platforms just doesn't scale. We do want to provide tailored experiences across multiple devices and form factors, but we can't expect ourselves to have the skill set and the time and the resources to target all of those different platforms with different code bases, different skill sets for each of those. So that's kind of the problem that we started to solve with Titanium Mobile, and now I'll kind of talk about how we're trying to get past that with Titanium, which is the tool that we've created. So it's a cross-platform tool, but generally speaking, the problem with cross-platform tools has been that you've always been able to get to multiple platforms. That hasn't been the issue. But the issue has been this problem of write once, suck everywhere, which was originally coined by Lauren Brichter, who originally wrote Twitter for iPhone. Obviously not a huge fan of cross-platform development tools. He's of the opinion that you end up with a watered-down experience on every platform that you support. So why bother? Why wouldn't you just make one great experience for one platform? And if that's the only platform you can do, at least you did it right. And there's some truth to that. Having a watered-down experience across multiple screens is not necessarily advantageous. Your iPhone user doesn't care how great your site or app looks on Android. They care about how well it works on the devices that they own. So what we set out to do with Titanium is to try to solve cross-platform a little bit differently. So get to a point where we're not going for write once, run everywhere, because that's never really been fully accomplished in any technology in the course of history. So it's not really a goal that's worth pursuing, at least in my estimation. So we want to get to a point where we're reusing a lot of code, but we're also embracing platform differences. When I'm creating an application for Android, it should behave in a certain way. If I'm creating one for BlackBerry, it should behave in a certain way. We also want to create a platform that was open source and extensible, because that's anytime you're going to be investing your time and energy into a platform, you need to be able to look under the hood, and that's an important core value for us. And we also wanted to leverage the skill sets that most developers have, which is why we made some of the technology decisions that we have over time. But the sort of fundamental principle that we've tried to capture with Titanium was delivering great applications that exceed user expectations, even though we're a cross-platform tool. So Titanium, what we like to say in a sentence if we describe Titanium is it's a platform for building best-in-class cross-platform mobile apps in JavaScript. Titanium is open source under the Apache 2.0 license, so it's a very business-friendly and permissive open source license. And it's the only cross-platform toolkit that allows you to actually do the native UI and native platform integrations that make native applications on mobile today special. So today we support iOS and Android. We also have our mobile web runtime, which just dropped with our last 2.0 release. It's still pretty raw. We're calling it a release candidate, but I'd probably call it more of a beta. But definitely check it out. It's coming along very quickly. We hope in time it achieves the same level of polish as like Essentia or one of those rich client frameworks in the browser, and we think it will. So definitely keep tabs on that. And then we've also been working on native support for BlackBerry 10, which we actually announced a couple of weeks ago. So we'll be supporting BlackBerry's new operating system, and then we have plans for Windows Phone later in the year as well. So how does Titanium work at sort of a high level? Your application you're going to be writing, and if we have time, I'll actually write a little bit of code to give you a sense of how it works. We may not, though, because I only have a half hour. But your application is going to be written in JavaScript. What Titanium provides is really has more in common with like a Node.js or a MacRuby and Hot Cocoa in that we provide a higher level JavaScript API over lower level native APIs for user interface and data access and the like. So Titanium provides for you a JavaScript to native code binding layer. So you can create objects in JavaScript which have essentially a paired object in native code which you can interact with and update properties on and things like that. So your application is your JavaScript code that you've written packaged up with a JavaScript interpreter that we ship with the application. And then we also have the Titanium native API implementations for each platform. And those things come together to form an actual native app or a web application when we're running in the browser. So what kind of applications can you build with Titanium? What's been done? We've actually been pretty pleased and humbled to see some of the apps that have come out in Titanium. NBC Universal, an entertainment company in the States, has been one of our most active and prolific users. They've done a lot of really cool stuff on the platform. But I've been most pleased to see what it's done for smaller companies and startups. Like Zipcar is a car rental service in the States that's been really successful, and they've been able to, with a very small team, target multiple platforms through Titanium with very good results. TripLingo is the same thing. They're a small team based out of Atlanta, which was mostly language experts. They've only have one guy on their team who's a real developer, but they have lots of really great domain knowledge in the language and language learning space. But they've been able to use Titanium to deploy across all kinds of Android and iOS tablets, and they've had some really good success with that application. HipSwap is also a very cool one. It's kind of it's Craigslist except less sketchy. So it's kind of a nice application for allowing you to sell items locally. So these are applications that are available in the States. I don't believe in Europe, so I apologize for that. But we actually have a majority of our user base is actually in Europe. 40% of our developers are based somewhere in Europe. So we have an amazing community out here as well. I also have a quick video. Actually, I think I will just demo this in the emulators. I had a little video embedded here in case we didn't have time to get to it. But thankfully, I think we will. The source code for the application I'm going to demo here in a second is up on that GitHub repository page that you see there. This presentation will also be tweeted out through the Appcelerator GitHub or Twitter account here in a moment. But before I get to the demos, again, we think Titanium is pretty cool. We have some pretty good traction. We have over 300,000 registered developers and 40,000 apps that have been deployed to the stores that we know of. So we've been really pleased to see lots of people having success with it. If you'd like to check it out yourself, appcelerator.com is the place to go to download it. And then you can follow us at Appcelerator if you're curious to keep up with us in terms of updates. At this point, I do want to just very quickly show off one demo of an application that I've been working on for our developer community. It's really kind of a prototype at this point, so it doesn't have a whole bunch of features. Whoops. And nor is it visible up on the big screen. So let's do this. All right, so this is an application that I've been working on. It's sort of a simple social networking application I created for our developer community. We have a lot of local meetups and other events that are going on, so I thought it would be cool to create an application that would help developers find these things and interact with each other. So I started kind of throwing this together, and this is sort of indicative of how we view cross-platform in Titanium. Again, since we're not going for write once, run everywhere, we're trying to go for something that allows us to achieve some code reuse. So you can see in this application, again, there's, I did throw it together in a couple of hours last night, so I apologize. There are some formatting issues, like with this table view row here. But again, this was implemented with our JavaScript API with native widgets, so the scroll friction and all of that is appropriate for a native application because it is a native user interface component. And the same code that was used to generate this table view over here and this list view on Android, that logic was all reused 100% across platforms. And there are other components too, like there's a profile screen, which hopefully will work. Apparently, the demo gods are not going to be kind to me right now. But there's a profile screen here that has a simple form that allows you to update information about your user. I might have to restart this because the Android emulator is never cooperative for demos. Just so you know, if you're ever on stage in front of like 100 people, just don't rely on the Android emulator under any circumstances. So we'll fire that up, and we'll start to see that a lot of these interior components are reused across platforms. So this form, I don't feel like I need to implement that across platforms. This is going to be essentially the same on an iOS application as it is on an Android application. And if I go to the Android side, I click on this button, which will bring up this profile view that I was just looking at. So the same code was used to generate like the interior components of my application. Again, never trust the Android emulator, especially on a projector. So you get the interior list views as well. If you look at this stream view, this is also the same code that's shared there. And where you start to see platform-specific differences is with the UI conventions that are used. You can create sort of an action bar type object on Android with a custom tab bar up on the top, which is sort of more in keeping with the user interface conventions on that platform. And then on iOS, you can have a native tab control with one sort of custom button that floats over the top and provide a very iOS-like experience with modal dialogues and toolbars and things like that. So again, not terribly impressive. I would definitely recommend that you check out some of those showcase apps that I just showed you moments ago if you're interested to get a sense of how Titanium works. But you're able to achieve code reuse with these bits in the interior of the application. We think it's dumb to have to learn platform-specific APIs to draw rectangles and do HTTP requests on multiple platforms. But there are opportunities for code reuse, especially in some of these areas where you're doing approximately the same thing. So with that, I'll just kind of turn it over to you all for any questions that you might have about Titanium. And we'll, again, just say thank you very much for having me. It was really fun. Question? Yes, we have one up there.
I was wondering, because one of the benefits of native apps, I'm getting the mic.
Excellent.
Awesome. OK, one of the benefits of a native app compared to a web are the native in-app purchases.
Yes.
And I actually developed an accelerator, and there's not an easy way to have in-app purchases yet that actually work. So my question is, what are the plans of in-app purchases for iOS in Accelerator?
Yeah, so there's a module for that that's currently available that you may or may not have used. It's not part of the core platform yet, but we are taking out, because there are some things that are in our, like we have a site, marketplace.accelerator.com, that has extensions to our platform that you can download. One of the mistakes we made with that module is we put it in the marketplace and it wasn't in the core. We're actually going to take it out of the marketplace and put it back in the core because it's a core API. That is going to happen at some point in the next couple of months. I don't know when, but it's happening soon. A lot of things that were external modules that are part of the core native platforms themselves, we're taking out of marketplace and putting back in the core product.
Cool, thanks.
Awesome. Other questions? Up there.
Hi. How many customizations you have to do to the code to make the UI look different on iOS and Android and different platforms?
It kind of depends on the component. We have a top-level Titanium JavaScript object or namespace, which has our entire API. And if there are components that can be consumed using a single API, we do that. So we have a TI UI create button function, which functions the same across all platforms. The way that you start to see like platform-specific customizations is for buttons on one platform, you might have different options or arguments to that constructor that are only supported on one platform or another. There are also some components that just don't exist, like the concept of a navigation controller doesn't exist on Android, for instance. So there's a TI UI iPhone namespace, which has a special function within that to create those types of user interface components. So it kind of depends on how you design your application. If you design your application to be completely custom and completely immersive, you can achieve pretty close to like 100% code reuse. But if you use a lot of platform-specific user interface components and navigation conventions, which is typical for, especially for like data-driven applications where you want to get in and get out, and it's very utilitarian. There, you're probably only going to be achieving, again, depending on the design, somewhere between 60 and 80% code reuse or something along those lines. So yeah, it depends greatly on how you design your application, but it's more about like finding where the common pieces are inside your design and where you can reuse. But even if, and some people do this, they take very drastically different paths through their user interface. Even if you don't reuse any user interface logic, we think it's still a win to have one common tool set and reuse all of your controller logic and business logic and your network interface and have all of that stuff be shared across platforms as well. Yeah. That's a question.
Yeah.
All the way in the back, too.
I have a question.
Oh, yeah. Go for it.
If you want to combine the openness of the web with working with native, like using web views and stuff for web-based content, is it possible or easy to do using the accelerator in Titanium?
Yeah, you can actually, because it's a high-level sort of API over the top of native APIs, you can create a web view component and actually include that inside your interface in the same way you would as if you were writing a native program. And with the web view control that we have in Titanium, we also have like a messaging API where you can publish messages into the web view and then publish them back out from JavaScript within the web view. So in that way, and a lot of developers have done this, they've taken more of a hybrid approach where sort of the Chrome and a lot of portions of the user interface are done in native, but they've actually used HTML and CSS in embedded web views for large portions of the UI. So yes, that is definitely possible and common.
Cool. I'll check it out.
Hi, in the back here.
Oh, hi.
I've actually been using Accelerator as well. We teach it in the school. But
Awesome.
the largest frustration we actually have is the customization issue. There is very little documentation, especially on the JSS. Are there any plans to improve that?
Yeah, I'm actually working on a higher level framework for Titanium as we speak, which has some backing all the way up. If you actually look at a Titanium application, which, I don't think you can see my IDE here, but I'll throw it over there. But basically, in a Titanium application, you have this file app.js in the resources directory, which is essentially the bootstrap file for your application. But Titanium doesn't impose any, other architectural, patterns on you besides that, which is both a good thing and a curse, which makes it very hard to understand how you're supposed to structure and style your user interface components. So we're going to be creating sort of now it's not going to be JSS specifically to comment on that technology. It's going to be JavaScript based, but we'll have a way of essentially mixing in style properties of a JavaScript object into other user interface components. But yeah, that's something we're working on over the next 2 to 3 months. It's a higher level framework with better support for styling and then platform specific, rendering for different components and a different component model as well. So JSS probably not so much, but we will be providing a way to mix in properties from JavaScript objects for user interface widgets. And it's awesome that you're teaching people to use Titanium. If you have any questions, come find me afterwards as well.
Thanks. That would be great.
Excellent. Yeah.
Thank you. There's Candor UI, which is trying to achieve a similar thing to Accelerator
Sorry, I don't know where I'm looking.
in the browser. Here, back here. And how would you say does that compare? I think it's in the very beginning, in the early stages, but it's trying to do the same, but in a browser Chrome, but also making the same code base look native in different platforms.
Right, I've played around with it a little bit. I don't know a ton about it, but again, it's a browser-based framework, which probably has more in common with Sencha or something along those lines. Excuse me. But they're actually taking the route of trying to, in CSS, style their component set in a way that makes sense across platforms. So it's really more of a CSS theming approach, which is probably something that you'd want to explore doing in the browser anyway, across platforms. But in the browser, especially if you're developing a pure web application, a lot of times you're adopting your own brand's design standards inside your application versus trying to conform to the platform standards. So it's kind of a gray area when you're talking about web applications. But it's different in the sense that it's not trying to create native user interface components. It's a CSS theme for Android or iOS or whatever.
Yeah.
One more?
Hello.
Okay.
Hello.
Yeah, hi.
Can you mix different languages in this IDE? So write 80% in JavaScript, 20% in Objective-C, some core data, some C, C#.
I like your math because it adds up to 110% of an application, which is what you want to put in every time. But yeah, you can. So we have like a module API, like the core Titanium APIs themselves have like a well-defined interface in Objective-C or Java that exposes objects to JavaScript. So if you want to do native extensions, you basically, like if we're talking about Android, you'll annotate a Java class, and methods within that class to be exposed to JavaScript, and in that way you can have a combination of JavaScript and native code, which you certainly can do. Yes. And I think that's all that we have time for. But if you have any other questions, definitely let me know. Come track me down. So thank you very much. I appreciate that.
Thank you very